Yes, can you able to see the slide?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, yes. So first of all, let us see the meaning of the word environment. Actually, the term environment derived from a French word, environia, which means to surround. That means it refers both abiotic as well as biotic environment. That is non-living as well as living environment. So the word environment means surrounding in which organisms lives. The organism cannot survive independently, always interact with the non-living, always interact with the non-living. So the environment and organisms, that is environment means the non-living, and the organisms are two dynamic and complex components of nature. So if you take a biosphere, you can see both living as well as non-living components. So both the things, both together is that forms the biosphere. That forms the biosphere. Yes. Here we are going to study about the ecosystem. What is ecosystem? Ecosystem, nothing but a fragment of the biosphere or a fragment of environment. So it is the structural and functional unit of ecology where the living organisms interact with each other as well as with the surrounding environment. Not only the living organism interact among themselves. Living organism means plants, animals, and microorganisms. Always remember, living organism means plants, animals, and the microorganisms. So not only the living organism interact among themselves, but also they interact with the surrounding environment. Just a minute, a disturbance. I'll cut and come. So the word ecosystem was first coined by A.G. Tansley. He is an English botanist. In the year 1935, he coined this term, ecosystem. And broadly speaking, you can see the ecosystem is of two types based on the nature. One is terrestrial ecosystem, another one is aquatic ecosystem. Terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem. Terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem. There are so many classifications are there, Pa. There are so many ways you can classify the ecosystem into different types. Whatever it is, these are the two different types of ecosystem. One is terrestrial, another one is aquatic. These are the two major ecosystem. These are natural ecosystem. The aquatic and terrestrial are natural ecosystem, not man-made ecosystem. Okay. Whatever may be the ecosystem, it may be the terrestrial ecosystem or aquatic ecosystem. Aquatic means water, you know. Aquatic ecosystem may be a fresh water or marine water. You know, listen carefully, lend your ears. Aquatic ecosystem may be a freshwater or marine water ecosystem. The freshwater ecosystem may be the rivers or the lakes. What's the difference between the rivers and the lakes? Can anyone say? Not based on the size. Not based on the size. Rivers are flowing. They are running water ecosystem. They are lotic. That means they are flowing. Whereas the ponds and lakes are stored water. That is lentic. Lentic. Lentic means they are stagnant. They are not moving. So it is lentic. So the freshwater ecosystem may be a lentic. That is standing water ecosystem. Lentic. Standing water ecosystem. Or it may be lotic. Running water ecosystem like rivers and small streams and all. And another one is marine ecosystem. It may be the ocean, seas, estuaries. What does it mean, estuaries? What does it mean, estuaries? Estuaries. Hello? Estuaries? Can you hear me? Children, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
What does it mean, estuaries?
Partly closed coastal body of water in which river water is mixed with salt water.
Very good, very good. The place where the river meet with the sea, that is the estuaries. Okay. Okay, yes. So that is a marine water ecosystem. And terrestrial ecosystem may be the grassland. Maybe the grassland, or it may be the forest, or it may be the desert. So the terrestrial ecosystem may be the forest, desert, or grassland. That's why I told you the terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem are the natural ecosystem, not man-made, not artificial. And this terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem further are classified. The aquatic ecosystem further classified into lentic and lotic, freshwater and marine water ecosystem. And terrestrial ecosystem is of three types: forest ecosystem, desert, and grassland. And whatever may be the type of ecosystem, you can see these are the two important components of ecosystem. One is abiotic components, another one is biotic components. The abiotic components means non-living components, which may be the physical environment like soil, water, and air. These are all the physical environments. Inorganic substances may be the carbon dioxide, nitrogen, water, oxygen, sulfur, phosphorus, calcium, potassium, and so on. These are all the inorganic substances that also form one of the important abiotic components. And climatic factors like light, temperature, atmospheric pressure, humidity. These are the climatic factors. All these three things together form the abiotic components, which decides the survival of living organism. All the three things, the physical environment, inorganic substances, and climatic factors, which decides the survival of the organisms. Whether the organism may be the plants or animals or microorganisms, the survival of any of the organisms mainly depend on these non-living components. Another important component of ecosystem is biotic components, that is living. And the living biotic components includes autotrophs, which are plants, heterotrophs, which are animals, and saprotrophs, microorganisms. The biotic components are further classified into producers, consumers, and decomposers. What are producers? All the green plants. All the green plants are producers because which can synthesize food material by making use of the solar energy. by making use of the sunlight, all the green plants can synthesize food material through the process photosynthesis. So they are producers. Since the plants can able to synthesize their own food material, they are known as autotrophs. And all the other non-chlorophyllous organisms and all the animals are collectively known as heterotrophs because they cannot synthesize the food by themselves. So they depend on others. That means either plants directly or indirectly. Either plants directly or indirectly. You know, the consumers may be herbivores or carnivores. The consumers may be herbivore or carnivore. Do you agree? Consumers may be herbivore. Can you give an example for herbivores?
Cow.
Cow, cattle, okay, deer, rabbit. These are all herbivores. They feed only on plants. Whereas the carnivorous animals, they kill and eat the flesh of other animals. So they are carnivores. Okay?
Yes, sir.
So the consumers may be a herbivore or carnivore. Then
Both.
decompose. Enema? Yes. And next one is decomposers. Decomposers like some bacteria and fungi, which consume the dead remains of other organisms. Feed on dead remains of other organisms. That means feed on dead and decaying organisms. It may be plants or animals. So some of the bacteria and fungi, they lead this mode of life. And that is why, and the mode of nutrition is saprotrophic. And that's why they are known as saprotrophs. Saprotrophs. So the biotic components are of three types. Producers, also called autotrophs, plants. Consumers, heterotrophs, that means all the animals. Decomposers, also called as saprotrophs, mainly some bacteria and fungi. So these are the two major components of any ecosystem. Any ecosystem, it may be a pond, or it may be a lake, or it may be a forest, or it may be a grassland, whatever it is. Whatever may be the type of ecosystem, you can see all the three abiotic components, what and all listed here. And all the three biotic components, what and all listed here. Maybe the size difference, numbers different. The size of the organisms or the number of organisms may differ. But anyhow, all these components are present. And see, both biotic and abiotic components, they interact among themselves. Can anyone say that how plants interact with the abiotic environment? Give one example. This is the way the plants interact with the abiotic environment, sir. Can anyone of you say? Can anyone say?
By photosynthesis.
Yes. By photosynthesis, where the plants depend on sunlight and carbon dioxide and water. So the plants to carry out photosynthesis, they depend on abiotic environment. That is, it depend on sunlight, it depend on water, it depend on carbon dioxide. All these three are non-living. They are all the abiotic factors. Likewise, the animals, for oxygen, it depends on the abiotic environment. So that's why I told you, both abiotic and biotic environments interact among themselves. If the two components interact among themselves, then only it helps to ensure the sustenance of life. Sustenance of life in a particular ecosystem is possible. Particular ecosystem is possible. Okay. So
Yes,
the
sir.
biotic organisms, the biotic components are producers, consumers, and decomposers. All the plants are said to be producers or autotrophs because they can make use of sunlight. And by taking the carbon dioxide and water from the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and water from the soil, they reduce the carbon dioxide into carbohydrates. But there are some lower organisms. There are some lower organisms also prepare the food by themselves, but for them they depend on some chemical energy. They depend on some chemical energy. Not the they cannot make use of solar energy. They cannot make use of solar energy, but they make use the energy released during the oxidation of some organic and inorganic substances. So that they are generally referred as chemoautotrophs. Whereas all the plants are said to be photoautotrophs because they can make use the sunlight, because they have chlorophyll pigment. Only the chlorophyll pigment can trap the chlorophyll pigment alone can trap the solar energy. Whereas the chlorophyll present in some bacteria cannot make use of sunlight. So they make use of the energy released during the oxidation of some inorganic and organic substances as a source of energy to synthesize food material. So that they are known as chemoautotrophs, chemochemicals. Okay. Yes.
Yes, sir.
And the consumers, I told, they may be the herbivores. Herbivores are nothing but primary consumers. Am I correct? Herbivores are nothing but primary consumer because the herbivores directly depend on the plants. The herbivores directly depend on the plants, directly feed on the producers. Herbivores directly feed on the plants or producer. That's why they are known as primary consumers. Whereas the animals which feed on the flesh of the herbivores are known as secondary consumers. Secondary consumers are primary carnivores. Primary carnivores. Likewise, you can see tertiary consumer, and topmost consumers are there. It depends on the ecosystem and it depends on the size of the animals. And one more thing, that decomposers. Okay. And you see the decomposers. We are the human beings, no? We eat both plants and animals. Am I correct? We eat both
Yes, sir.
plants and animals. Have you ever heard about detritivores? Detritivores.
No, sir.
No. Detritivores nothing but the organism which feed on dead remains of the plants and animals. The dead remains of plants and animals. They're also known as, see, like earthworms, termites, vultures. They are all detritivores. They are all detritivores. Enema?
Scavengers, sir.
Yeah, scavengers.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Detritivores also called scavengers. Detritivores also called scavengers.
Sir, like vultures?
Yeah, vultures, termites. Hope you understand. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes. Now let us see the pond. All of you might have seen. It may be a man-made pond or it may be a natural pond. Okay. In your area, definitely you would have come across the pond. And you might have seen some of the plants, some of the animals living in that pond. If you keenly observe, if you go close to the pond and observe, you can see variety of animals and variety of plants. Some plants are floating over the surface of water. Some plants are deeply rooted. And some plants are submerged. Maybe rooted or not rooted. Free floating. They are free floating hydrophytes. They are known as hydrophytes. Hydrophytes means plants that live in water. Some plants are freely floating. Some plants are submerged. Some plants are deeply rooted. Likewise, we can classify. And in the plants, the producers know in pond, you can see here I have listed out here the biotic factors, producers, consumers, and decomposers. They are all biotic factors. What and all producers? Algae and hydrophytic plants. Algae may be unicellular or multicellular. And all the hydrophytic plants which are multicellular, they are larger in size. In this picture, you can see some of the huge plants you can see. But algae are microscopic. It may be unicellular or multicellular. Some algae are unicellular and some algae are multicellular. Can you give one example of unicellular algae? No idea. Chlamydomonas. Chlamydomonas is a typical example for unicellular algae. Yes, of course, multicellular algae is present in a pond. And some phytoplanktons also there. It is not given in this slide. Phytoplanktons. Planktons means any floating unicellular organism. Floating unicellular organisms. The floating unicellular organism. The planktons may be phytoplanktons or zooplanktons. I repeat, planktons are floating organisms. Mostly they are unicellular. And these planktons may be phytoplanktons or zooplanktons. Phytoplanktons are nothing but plants, which are autotrophs. Zooplanktons are animals, which are herbivores. So zooplanktons, both whether it is a phytoplankton or zooplankton, they are microscopic. And phytoplanktons are unicellular floating plants, whereas zooplanktons are unicellular floating animals which feed on phytoplanktons. And phytoplanktons are the major producers. Phytoplanktons are the major producers in an aquatic ecosystem. Phytoplanktons are the major producers in an aquatic ecosystem. And the consumers here in this pond, what are all the consumers? The protozoa and crustacea. Protozoa and crustacea are the primary consumers. That means they are herbivores. Primary consumers are always herbivores. Because they feed on plants directly. So they are herbivores. So here, as far as a pond ecosystem concerned, protozoa and crustacea are the primary consumers or herbivores. You know the protozoa. And do you know the crustacea? What are crustacea? And in which animal group it comes? It comes under which phylum? Crustacea, which comes under which phylum? Which phylum under which crustacea comes? Arthropoda. You know, where the cockroach, scorpion, cockroach, scorpion, prawn. Okay. Along with that, this animal also comes, crustacea. And secondary consumers here, insects and larvae of some animals. Insects, especially insects and larvae, they may be the secondary consumers. Here. And tertiary consumers, fishes and sharks, snakes, they are all tertiary consumers. Here in this picture, you can see some snakes also given. They are the tertiary consumers. or you can say topmost consumer, topmost consumers. So primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers. All of them together are consumers. Then decomposers. As usual, the bacteria and fungi. Bacteria and fungi are the decomposers. They help in the decomposition of the plants and animals. So it not only it helps in decomposition, but also indirectly it helps in the recycling of substances. Recycling of substances, biogeochemical cycles. The recycling of substances between the living and non-living components. You cannot imagine the ecosystem, or you cannot imagine the life without the decomposers, though they are microscopic. They play a major role not only in decomposition, but also it helps in biogeochemical cycles. So these decomposers helps in decomposition of the dead bodies of the plants and animals. So all the organic and inorganic substances and minerals that are locked up in the dead bodies of the plants and animals will be released into the soil. And from the soil, once again, these inorganic and organic substances, minerals, vitamins, everything will be absorbed by the root system of the plants. And from the plants, it will be transported to herbivore, and from the herbivore, it will be transported to carnivores and so on. And finally, after the decomposition, the content present in the bodies of plants and animals once again will come back to soil or water. So it helps in the recycling of minerals. So that is the reason why decomposers are very much important in an ecosystem. So these are all the biotic components: producers, consumers, and decomposers. And above all, the abiotic factors: the light, the temperature, the water, minerals, atmospheric pressure, humidity, everything. All the abiotic factors, which decides the life in a particular ecosystem. Without sunlight, there is no photosynthesis. If photosynthesis is affected, it will affect the entire life on the ecosystem, because all the animals depends on the plants. So that's why photosynthesis drives the life of the entire earth. So it is a light-driven or life-driven process. Photosynthesis is very, very important. It drives the whole world. It drives the entire earth. So all the animals depend on this process, photosynthesis. Hope you understand.
Yes, sir.
Yes. The next important thing, food chain. Food chain. First, you see the meaning of the word food chain. Food chain is nothing but the sequential interlinking of organisms. Here the definition given as a series of events in which one organism eats another and obtain energy, simply. Or in other words, you can say the sequential interlinking of organisms, involving transfer of food energy from the producers through a series of organisms. With repeated eating and being eaten. Repeated eating and being eaten. Say, for example, here you can see the sunlight. From the sunlight, here a twig of a leaf is given. But imagine it's a plant. Imagine not the twig of a plant. Imagine it's a small herb or shrub or tree, whatever it is. It is a plant. By making use of sunlight, the plants prepare the food. And the twig of the plant is being eaten by the herbivore, grasshopper. Grasshopper, which is the herbivore. Or you can say primary consumer. So the primary consumers are always herbivores. Primary consumers are always herbivores. Now, the food or the energy is transferred from plants to herbivores. When the herbivores are being eaten by frog, which is a secondary consumer, or you can say primary carnivore, because the frog will kill and eat herbivore. That is why the frog is a carnivore. And since it occupies the first level, that is why it is known as primary carnivore. So you can call frog as secondary consumer or primary carnivore. So now the energy is transferred from grasshopper into frog. And when the frog is being eaten by vulture or hawk, which is the tertiary consumer or secondary carnivore, now the energy is transferred from frog into hawk. So what happens? That's why I told you repeated eating and being eaten. Twig of a plant is being eaten by grasshopper, and in turn it will be eaten by frog, and frog in turn will be eaten by hawk. That's why I told you the sequential interlinking of organisms. Yes, you can see the sequential, one after the other. Sequential interlinking of organisms, which involves transfer of energy, food energy, from the producers, that is from the producer, the plants, through a series of organisms, That is what known as food chain. In a food chain, you can see each level in the food chain is known as trophic level. Each level in the food chain is known as trophic level. And the plants are the first trophic level. Plants form the first trophic level, and herbivores are second trophic level. Sorry. So here you can see the plants are the first, plants occupy the first trophic level, and herbivores are the second trophic level, and primary carnivore form the third trophic level, and hawk will form the fourth trophic level. So each level in the food chain is known as trophic level. Each level in the food chain is known as trophic level. Got the idea? Hello? Got the idea? The trophic levels. So trophic levels, nothing but each steps or each level in the food chain where the transfer of energy occurs. That is called trophic levels. Green plants, that is producers, form the first trophic level. Herbivores, that is the primary consumers, that form the second trophic level. And the carnivore, it forms the third trophic level. And fourth trophic level also may be there. So what happens in this? The food or energy is transferred from one trophic level to another trophic level. Am I correct? The food or energy is transferred from one trophic level to another trophic level. So food chain show the transfer of energy in an ecosystem. The arrows between the two trophic level represents the transfer of energy. And remember one thing regarding the amount of energy transferred. Lend your ears regarding the amount of energy transferred. The quantum of available energy in a food chain successively gets decreased at each trophic level as a result of waste of energy in the form of heat. I repeat, the amount of available energy in a food chain successively gets decreased at each trophic level. Why? It is due to the waste of energy in the form of heat. Okay. Do you know the second law of thermodynamics? Do you know second law of thermodynamics?
No, sir.
What says second law of thermodynamics?
So we don't know, sir.
Didn't study?
So it's not in our motions.
Okay. Yes. I briefly explain. According to the second law of thermodynamics, the transformation of energy from one form to other is inefficient and involves dissipation of unavailable energy. Dissipation of unavailable energy. That is, transformation of energy from one form to another is inefficient and involves dissipation of unavailable energy. So, when the energy is transferred from one trophic level to another trophic level, some amount of energy is lost in the form of heat. Lost in the form of heat. Okay. Say, for example, I can explain you loss of energy at successive trophic levels. It excess size of the food chain in an ecosystem to maximum 4 or 5 steps. Listen here. Here, how many trophic levels are there? 4 excluding sunlight. Excluding sunlight, how many trophic levels are there? 4. So, in some ecosystem, the trophic levels may be up to 5. Maybe up to 5. So, only 4 or 5 trophic levels only in any ecosystem. Why? The reason because the amount of energy keeps on decreasing. Amount of energy keeps on decreasing when it is transferred from one trophic level into other trophic level. So if any ecosystem will contain more than 5 trophic levels, then organisms occupying beyond the 5th trophic level will not get any energy. Be able to follow. If organisms belonging to 6th or 7th trophic level will not get any energy from the previous trophic level. So the organism without energy cannot survive. That is why the nature decides. The nature will fix the number of trophic levels in an ecosystem based on the availability of energy. So maximum 4 to 5 trophic levels only. Maximum 4 to 5 trophic levels only. And you see, a food chain is always straight and proceeds in a progressive straight line only. That means in a food chain, there is an unidirectional flow of energy from the sun to the producers and subsequently to different types of consumers. That is, from the sun to plants, from the plants to grasshopper, and from the grasshopper to frog, and from the frog to hog. And this is the typical food chain present in grassland. It's a typical food chain present in grassland. And as I already told you, the number of trophic levels are maximum up to 4 or 5. Maximum up to 4 or 5. Okay. But you see, there are some organisms are omnivores. Some organisms are omnivores. And these occupy different trophic positions in different food chains. The omnivores, they occupy different trophic positions in different food chains. Okay. What about human being? Are we herbivore or carnivore or omnivore?
Omnivores.
Omnivores. So human being will occupy different trophic levels. Okay, some human beings are herbivores. Am I correct? That means they feed only on plants and plant products. And some human beings eat both plants as well as animals. So they will occupy both second trophic level and third trophic level. That is what they mean. So some organisms which are omnivores, they occupy different trophic levels in different kinds of food chains. And remember one thing, when the energy is transferred from one trophic level to another trophic level, nearly 80 to 90% of the energy is lost in the form of heat. And this food chain, what I'm showing you, is a typical example for food chain present in grassland. Ecosystem. Do you have any doubts in this food chain?
No doubts.
Okay.
Sir, can you explain the loss of heat alone, sir? That
See,
loss of energy due to heat.
Yes. See, you see, normally respiration, it's an exothermic reaction. What is exothermic reaction?
Release
Energy
of
is
heat.
release of heat. See, imagine the grasshopper. When it consumes the plants, it consumes the energy from the plants. And out of this energy, when it oxidizes the food material present in the leaves, some amount of energy is lost. Some amount of energy is stored by the animals. So some amount of energy is lost while they oxidize the energy obtained from the plants. Okay. So during the course of oxidation, some amount of energy is liberated as heat. Okay. So for example, 100 gram of energy obtained from the plants. Okay. Among the 100 grams, say for example, 20 gram of energy released into the environment in the form of heat. So the remaining 80 grams of energy only available. Among the 80 gram, 20 gram of the energy stored by the grasshopper. And another 20 gram will be utilized by the grasshopper to perform some vital activities. So when the frog feed on grasshopper, how much amount of energy it obtains? Tell me.
60, sir.
See, 20 gram of energy is lost in the form of heat. 20 gram of energy will be stored by the grasshopper for future. And 20 gram of energy utilized by the grasshopper to perform its various functions. And now you tell me how much amount of energy obtained by the frog when it feed on the grasshopper?
140.
40 gram. And all the three things will happen in the frog also. So out of this 40 gram of energy, while it performs the oxidation, some amount of energy is lost in the form of heat. And some amount of energy will be stored by the frog for future use. Animals, what's the storage food of animals? What's the storage food in animals? Glycogen. And some amount of energy will be utilized by the frog to perform its various physiological activities. So when hawk feed on the frog, only a small amount of energy will be obtained. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So that is the reason why in a food chain only maximum 4 or 5 trophic levels are present, because the amount of energy keep on decreasing. From one trophic level to another trophic level. That is why the nature restricts the number of trophic levels in an ecosystem. Okay. Now the next question, whether the food chain is always straight. Here I told you it's linear. It seems to be linear. Am I correct? The food chain seems to be linear. But in practical or in nature, the food chain do not operate in isolation. Do not operate in isolation. That means it is because in natural environment, each organism is generally eaten by two or more kinds of organisms, which in turn are eaten by several other organisms. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
See, remember one thing.
Yes, sir.
Here you can, in this food chain, you can see it seems that hawk feed only on frog. No, it is not like that. Hawk may feed some other animals other than frog also. That is why I told you, in nature, food chains do not operate in isolation. It is because in natural environment, each organism is generally eaten by two or more kinds of organisms, which in turn are eaten by several other organisms. Thus, instead of a straight line food chain, the relationship between the organisms forms a sort of interlinking pattern. Called food web. Here you are showing I'm showing the typical example for food web. So food web is nothing but interconnected food chain. Describing various paths that energy takes through an ecosystem. Now there is a question for you, children. If the food chain is straight always, what will happen to the organisms? Of course, in nature it is not possible, but imagine if the food chain is always straight, linear, what will happen?
So with each
A specific
basic-
organism would be eating a specific organism, so it is not possible.
Yeah, will die.
It's not
will die.
evenly like.
Yes. Okay. If any organism feed only selective on a particular organisms, okay, in the absence of that particular organism, then the predator cannot survive. The predator which feed on a particular organism only will not survive. So the food web helps to sustain the life. Can you take it in that sense? Food web helps to sustain the life of an organism. In an ecosystem. The food web helps to sustain or maintain the ecosystem. So the interlinking of